Joe Rogan and Stephen Myer did a podcast together sometime earlier. They touched upon various subjects. Then their conversation turned to the questions of faith and belief in God. Rogan asked Dr. Myer about his faith, why he believes in Jesus, particularly about the resurrection. Myer provided a compelling response that left Rogan stunned.
This is an extraordinary event, right? You're talking about a resurrection of a person who died and came back and was the Son of God. This is a big claim.
Yeah, it is a big claim.
For starters, Joe Rogan hosts one of the most successful podcasts, The Joe Rogan Experience. He has close to 15 million followers. His podcasts have gained massive popularity for their unfiltered conversation, covering a wide variety of topics such as culture, philosophy, science, and so on. Rogan's humor and curiosity define his unique appeal. Stephen C. Myer holds a PhD in philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge. He specialized in the philosophy of biology. He's a prominent proponent of intelligent design and one of the founders of the Discovery Institute. Intelligent design is a theory that posits that certain features of the universe and living organisms are best explained by the intelligent cause rather than undirected natural processes. Myer has several best-selling books on ID and continues to promote intelligent design within the realm of evolutionary biology and the origins of life research. Stephen Myer answered Joe Rogan's probing questions about why he believes in God, in Jesus. It's a masterclass on how to talk to non-believers who are curious about our Christian faith. So in this video, let's break up their dialogue into 4 segments. First, we will watch the video clips of their discussion and then follow it with a brief commentary and add supplementary details that would further help our understanding. Welcome to Discern Scripture YouTube channel. We post videos regularly on various topics that are related to the biblical world, its history, and its present relevance. We would really appreciate if you subscribe and help us reach a wider audience. We are committed to bring unique content and fresh perspective to our analysis that will inform mind and strengthen faith. Please feel free to look through our recent series and other videos and share them with those that might be interested. Now let's get on with the video. First, Myer sets up the ground for engagement. Before explaining about Jesus, Dr. Myer backs off a little bit and reminds Joe Rogan of 2 things. First, he defines his limitations, and then he takes the conversation to objective and verifiable information.
I tend to take an evidentialist and philosophical approach to the kinds of questions you're asking, including the question about why believe the other parts of the Bible, not just about the creation of the universe, but about the historical witness of Jesus Christ or the Exodus or things like that. And there I would say my general answer is that I have a strong avocational interest in the historicity of the Bible as one can test it based on external sources of historical evidence from documentary historical sources and archaeological sources. So just a quick thumbnail, and in a way I'd prefer not to go too deeply into this because I'd rather talk about the ID.
First, he points out his expertise is mainly with the intelligent design and origin of life area. As we noted earlier, he holds a PhD in philosophy of science from the University of Cambridge. He is definitely a brilliant scholar. But as he was going to talk about the biblical world beyond the creation, that is beyond the scope of his expertise, he acknowledges his limitation. He doesn't force his authority as a philosopher of science into the discussion. This honesty is quite important and instructive when we engage with non-believers as we share our faith. Second, if he started his answers directly from the scripture, Rogan could have immediately dismissed the points as biased and agenda-driven. So he pushes the conversation to a more objective and verifiable historical aspects. He says that he has carefully assessed the arguments and the evidence presented and has come to believe the conclusions stand the test of philosophical reasoning. Let's go over the 4 arguments that he presents. First is the archaeological-historical evidence. Dr. Myer presents few archaeological data that relates to the individuals who are mentioned in the gospel narratives. First, he mentions about the pilot stone inscription.
I want to know your thought process.
Okay, so my thought process. So, crucial event in, for example, the New Testament is the trial and death of Jesus of Nazareth and subsequent resurrection. one key, really striking thing that I've discovered in my avocational interest in archaeology is that the 5 or 6 leading figures, most important figures in that trial narrative, which take up about a quarter to a third of the 4 Gospels, have all been independently attested by archaeological inscriptions in the last 50 or 60 years. There were some construction workers working in Caesarea Maritima in Israel in 1960-ish, turned over a big slab of rock, and on the back was an inscription from Pontius Pilate listing himself as the governor of Judea with a tribute to Tiberius Caesar. Significant because in the Gospels, the ministry of Jesus is reported to have occurred when Tiberius was the Roman emperor, Pilate was the governor, and we know all about in the trial that the key role that Pilate played. Recently,
and what year was this attributed to?
Well, it's attributed to the period of time in which Tiberius was emperor. So I think that was 15 through 15 through to 30. I can't remember the end of his emperorship, but it's the time mentioned in the New Testament as to when Jesus did his thing.
The Pilate stone inscription is a significant archaeological artifact related to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, who is mentioned in the New Testament accounts of Jesus' trial and crucifixion. The Pilate stone was discovered in 1961 at the archaeological site of Caesarea Maritima, which was an ancient city and administrative center built by King Herod the Great on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. This inscription is about the dedication of a building to the Roman Emperor Tiberius, and it includes the name Pontius Pilate as the prefect of Judea at that time. The inscription reads as follows: This Augustus Tiberium Pontius Pilatus Prefectus Judea. Translated, it means, to the divine Augustus this Tiberium Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. The Pilate stone is significant because it provides extra biblical evidence to the historical existence of Pontius Pilate, confirming his role as the prefect of Judea during the time of Jesus' crucifixion. This discovery has helped to verify the historical accuracy of the biblical accounts concerning Pilate's governorship of Judea in the 1st century. Next, Dr. Myers refers to the Caiaphas ossuary.
In Jerusalem, under the traditional site of the high priest, was discovered a stone ossuary bearing the name of Caiaphas and Caiaphas ben Joseph on 2 sides of an ornately decorated ossuary containing the bones of someone who was reburied by this practice that the Jews undertook during that unique period of time from about 20 BC to the destruction of the temple. So you have multiple figures from that key event who have been independently attested and established in that time period. Herod Antipas, we know from his coins and his building projects, Jesus himself, Peter, Annas, the other high priest. So you have these multiple lines of external corroboration for this really important account. And then you have external sources like Josephus and Tacitus. So there's a weight of external corroborating evidence supporting the historicity of these narratives. And that gives you, I think, a good reason to take the narrative seriously and to evaluate their other claims. It's, in fact, a level of corroboration that I think is almost unprecedented for any document that old.
The Caiaphas ossuary is an archaeological artifact that gained significant attention due to the potential connection to Caiaphas, the high priest who is mentioned in the New Testament accounts of Jesus' trial and crucifixion as well. The ossuary is a stone burial box. It was used for preserving the bones of the dead. The Jewish people practiced this double burial system between 20 BC and AD 70. First, they would leave the dead bodies in the tomb for 1 year. After 1 year, they would return and collect the bones and place them in an ossuary. Jews followed this practice in the time when Jesus lived. The ossuary of Caiaphas was discovered in 1990 in a burial cave in Jerusalem's Peace Forest region, south of the old city of Jerusalem. It dates to the 1st century AD, which aligns with the time when Caiaphas lived. The significance of the ossuary lies in an Aramaic inscription which is engraved on its side. It reads, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. This provides evidence of the existence of Caiaphas, and this decorated ossuary shows his prominent position within the society, something that the New Testament confirms. Third, Dr. Myer mentions the coins and construction of Herod Antipas. He was the son of Herod the Great. Herod Antipas was a tetrarch of Galilee and Perea during the time of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. So these are the Herodian coins. His name is engraved on these coins. Fragments from the work of Nicholas the Damascus mention Herod Antipas once. Also, Jewish Roman historian Josephus mentions Antipas several times. Josephus refers to Herod Antipas as both Antipas, also as Herod the Tetrarch. Both of these titles are used in the Bible. Along with these archaeological findings, Myer also mentions that contemporary historians Josephus and Tacitus make references to Jesus, his disciples, and about the emergence of the early Christian sect from Judea. These are an extraordinary set of external correlations that is unprecedented in Myer's own words. So Dr. Myer goes on to make this reasonable point. These unprecedented external corroborations underscore the historical reliability of the New Testament and lend credibility to trust their other faith claims. And then Myers moves on to his second argument. He refers to 4 major biblical scholarly studies. So when the topic moves on about the resurrection of Jesus, Rogan calls it a Bigfoot, an imaginary tale. To this, Myer points out the extent of scholarly engagement on the topic of resurrection. This is one of the most studied aspects of Christianity from the early times until today.
So that's
corroboration in terms of the narrative of the stories, or corroboration in terms of the historical figures being real?
both. In Josephus,
The narrative of the stories being the resurrection of Jesus?
reports of same. You find reports of there's 2 different texts of Josephus, one that was likely doctored by medieval Christians that historians rightly regard as too affirmative in his expression of belief in Jesus of Nazareth, and one that came to us through the Arabic world, where the Josephus text is much more credible, where he records the basic facts of the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth, including being crucified under Pontius Pilate, and then that there were reports that he had appeared to many after being resurrected. So there's a whole
Right, but there's reports of Bigfoot.
well, right, but we have.
You know,
I mean, I love
human
your.
being,
I love
particularly back then.
Yeah.
Where there's no real access to universal information like the internet. There's no real. There's no libraries. Like where are you getting all your information from?
Right. So you have one of the best formats in all of Talk Anything, because you have these long form discussions. But I think even this format will not lend itself to being able to wrestle the question of the
Right. No,
historical
I don't think we're going to wrestle it. I just want to know why you.
Right. So I think there are 3 great scholars who have addressed the question of whether or not actually 4. One is Wolfhart Pannenberg, the great German theologian, historian. One is William Lane Craig. One is N.T. Wright with his magisterial tome, The Resurrection of the Son of God, and the other is Gary Habermas. And there are numerous questions that come up in evaluating all this different type of historical testimony regarding that seminal event, if true, in human history.
Right.
And I've done a deep dive on that stuff, and I'm convinced that the resurrection of Jesus Christ happened as a real event in history.
Particularly, Myer cites 4 important scholars who assess the historical sources and drew objective conclusions on the reliability of resurrection reports in the New Testament. The first scholar Myer refers to is Wolfhart Pannenberg, a German philosopher, theologian, and historian. In his book, Jesus, God and Man, Pannenberg engaged on Jesus' resurrection. He makes very important points about the resurrection of Jesus. The evidence of Jesus' resurrection is so strong that nobody would question it except for 2 things. First, it is a very unusual event. And second, if you believe it happened, you have to change the way you live. That's Wolfhart Pannenberg. The second scholar Myer refers to is William Lane Craig. He's one of the important Christian apologists of our times. He published a major work in 2000 titled The Sun Rises, the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. In this book, he attempts to provide spiritual certainty to the believers and rational certainty to the non-believers. This is what he says about resurrection. Even if the disciples had believed in the resurrection of Jesus, it is doubtful they would have generated any following. So long as the body was interred in the tomb, a Christian movement founded on the belief in the resurrection of the dead man would have been an impossible folly. The book is an excellent work of scholarship. The third scholar Myer refers to is N.T. Wright. Wright published his excellent volume on Jesus' resurrection in 2003, The Resurrection of the Son of God. Wright argues that bodily resurrection of Jesus is actually the most plausible explanation of the actual events. He proceeds from the 2 points of data. Number one, there was an empty tomb. And number two, the earliest followers of Jesus really thought Jesus had appeared to them after dying on the cross. Wright argues that neither of these by themselves would lead of necessity to believe in the resurrection of Jesus, but the best explanation of the two facts is to see a bodily resurrection of Jesus. Here is a quote from N.T. Wright. Jesus' resurrection is the beginning of God's new project, not to snatch people away from the earth to heaven, but to colonize earth with the life of heaven. That, after all, is what the Lord's Prayer is all about. The fourth work Dr. Myer mentions is of Gary Habermas. In the recent years, Dr. Habermas did a lot of research on resurrection. Highly recommend these 2 volumes on resurrection. Volume 1, Habermas presents the evidence for the resurrection. In Volume 2, he takes on different refutations or claims made against the resurrection of Christ and clarifies them. He applies a minimal fact approach to the study of resurrection. Both volumes come closer to 2,000 pages. This is the most detailed work of scholarship to date on the resurrection of Christ. Stephen Myer refers the work of these 4 scholars to Joe Rogan, and he says that he had done a deep dive into the material and found the arguments for the resurrection of Christ quite compelling for his liking. Argument 3, conversion of James, the brother of Jesus. Dr. Myer thinks that one of the most compelling cases for the resurrection of Christ was the conversion of James, Jesus' own earthly brother.
What historians must do is evaluate the reliability of historical testimony if what's coming is historical testimony. One piece of historical testimony that's always been extremely compelling to me is the testimony of James, who is mentioned in the New Testament as one of the witnesses to whom Jesus appeared after the alleged resurrection event. He was also mentioned earlier in the New Testament as one of his brothers or half-brothers, depending on whether you're a Protestant or a Catholic Christian, how you view that. But he was mentioned as one of his own family members who did not accept his crazy messianic claims, and he did not believe in him. But something changed James's mind. We later find that he becomes the leader of the Jerusalem Christian church, the early Jewish believers in Jesus. And there's, but we also then know from Josephus that James was stoned to death, martyred for his witness to the resurrection. Now, there's a kind of very simple argument, but it goes back to one of the early Christian writers, Eusebius, saying that people will lie to get out of trouble. They do it all the time. We see it in our politics. But people don't lie to get into trouble.
We're just assuming that they would let him lie or do anything to get out of trouble.
There were many early Christians who died claiming to have seen the resurrected Jesus. But in the case of James, we know that he expressed that testimony, and we know it from an external to the Bible source, namely Josephus.
What do you think of...
So I think this is an example of, okay, here's an historical claim. How can we evaluate the reliability of that witness? People will give their lives for an abstract philosophy that they believe to be true. People do not give their lives for a factual claim that they know to be false. That's lying to get into trouble.
James was not one of the disciples of Christ. However, shortly after the events of his crucifixion, something changed. The reason for his change of heart is mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 7. Then he appeared to James, James came to see the risen Jesus face to face, and he was completely changed. He became a believer, and he went on to become a leading figure in the Jerusalem church, the bishop of the Jerusalem church. In Galatians chapter 2, verse 9, Paul calls James one of the pillars of the church, along with Peter and John. Eventually, this James, known in Christian tradition as James the Just, laid down his life as a martyr for Christ in AD 62. His death was known even in Rome and was reported by Josephus. Josephus wrote about the martyrdom of James in the book Antiquity of the Jews in book 20, chapter 9, section 1. It was the high priest Annas who took advantage of the temporary absence of the Roman governor to convene a council and have James, along with some others, condemned and executed by stoning. Josephus describes James as the brother of Jesus who was called Christ. Here is the quote. Roman governor Festus was now dead, and Albinus was but upon the road. So he assembled the Sanhedrim of judges and brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others, or some of his companions. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. This passage is often cited as one of the earliest non-Christian reference to Jesus and his family in the historical records. Dr. Myer reminds Joe Rogan that people lie to get out of trouble, but they don't lie to get into trouble. If James and apostles were lying about Jesus' resurrection, all that they were getting at that point of time was rejection and death. They were getting into trouble with the Jews, the Romans, and pretty much everyone in positions of power at that time. Not only that, none of them, even at the point of death, revoked or went back on their testimony. Except John, all the disciples of Jesus died a martyr for their belief in the resurrection of Jesus. So Myer concludes that it is likely that they were reporting on what they witnessed and saw, not making up the story by themselves. One more thing, an ossuary, a bone box containing the name James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, was found in 2002. This is an extraordinary finding that furnishes one more evidence from the time of Jesus. The last argument Myer makes is on the epistemology of knowledge.
True, but we don't know what James' mental state was. We don't know if James was schizophrenic. There's so many variables that could be taken into consideration.
It's a question of weighing the preponderance of the evidence and deliberating on it over time. I agree. I'm not
I understand.
claiming that in sharing these things that I will.
No, I'm happy you are sharing them.
Yeah.
I'm happy you are sharing them.
You're just getting an insight into my thought processes.
That's all
I'm very
I'm
much concerned I'm a philosopher, okay? Alvin Planning's great work with warrant and proper function. We say that knowledge, philosophers say knowledge is justified true belief.
So Joe Rogan questions the mental state of James, that whether he was as schizophrenic. Here he was implying how certain we can be on the historical statements or belief that come to us from the first century. People could have made up all these things. In philosophical terms, what Joe Rogan was asking is related to epistemology, a branch of philosophy that is concerned with the nature, scope, and limits of human knowledge. So here Myer reveals his thought process as a philosopher and guides him. It is important to weigh in the preponderance of the evidence and deliberating it over time to draw out cautious conclusions. That's a reasonable principle to apply when dealing with historical questions such as this one. Quite fittingly, Myer refers to Alvin Plantinga. Plantinga is one of the most influential philosopher theologians of our times. His Warrant trilogy, particularly the last one, Warranted Christian Belief, published in 2000, is a full-blooded defense of Christian beliefs. Based on Plantinga, Myer makes this thoughtful statement. Philosophers say that knowledge is justified through belief. This is the crux. The nature of knowledge that Myer presented was justified and justifiable in view of current historical archaeological evidence and substantiated with personal experience. Thus, the knowledge of faith relates to the rational category as well as the personal and the spiritual. So here is a closing reflection. Stephen Myer packed so much information, external and objective, something that might be appealing to a non-believer like Joe Rogan. Along with Rogan, all of his viewers had a tremendous opportunity to listen to the historical evidences from the world of the first century, where Jesus lived and Christianity as a movement started. 4 scholarly studies on resurrection, the conversion and martyrdom of James, the brother of Jesus, and finally, the epistemology of knowledge itself. This is indeed a powerful and instructive framework in presenting and making a case for our faith. Myer did indeed deliver a masterclass in public presentation of faith. If you're interested to check out more on the resurrection of Jesus, check out this link in the description. We present 7 arguments to the resurrection of Jesus. I'm sure you will find it compelling. Not only Rogan, but all his viewers, particularly who are skeptical of faith and Christian claims, may you weigh in the preponderance of the evidence and make a decision as Myer suggested. It's my prayer that as you hear and ponder on these evidence, may it all lead to meet Jesus Christ our Lord. In John chapter 5, verse 24, Jesus says, "Most assuredly I say to you, he who hears my word and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life, and shall not come to judgment, but has passed from death into life." Jesus, who conquered death, promises life, eternal life, to all who believe in his name. May all these discussions lead us to greater understanding and building greater faith in Jesus Christ. Thank you for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe and support our channel. Click on the bell icon so that you can get notification whenever we post a new video. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section below. God bless you all. Shalom.